I can see you, David.
Hey, Chuck.
I'm on video. Can't.
So good evening, and thank you for being here this evening. My name is Matthew Daly, and I am Vice President of the Grand Rapids Historical Society. And we're here to welcome you to this month's presentation. A couple of things right off the bat, I would like to point out that if you open the chat, you'll be able to find that if you have any bandwidth or connectivity issues, this will be also live streamed through YouTube. So you'll be able to find that there. If you are also experiencing bandwidth drop, you can also, if you turn off your camera, oftentimes that assists with the overall connection through Zoom. It can be quite fussy. Your audio will work even though your camera is not on at that point. Please make sure to mute yourself and to remain on mute. That can sometimes lead to some, as last month, inadvertently hilarious moments, which are pretty good and minor, but they do happen. So we'll be able to do those things within there. If you have questions, feel free to place them in the comments box on YouTube, or also to put them in the chat box on Zoom. So if I can hear a few other folks talking. Yes, do mute yourself. I'm going to ask again that we had one person talk on their phone last month through the whole thing. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward. All right, so without further ado, tonight's speaker is David Britten. He is a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and public school administrator. He grew up in Wyoming and spent part of the 60s living in the Galewood-Urbandale-Burlingame community, where he attended school at Holy Name, Godfrey Elementary, and Lee High. Following his military career, he served as a principal in Wayland before coming home to the Godfrey Lee School District, where he served 15 years in the roles of principal and superintendent. He previously published a history of the local National Guard units and is currently working on his second title centered around tonight's presentation. All right. One thing I would remind everyone again is please mute yourself. We're getting a lot of, I can hear someone's computer clicking. I'm going to zap through here and see if I can't track that person down by name. Yes, so just to make sure we give our speaker all of his room. And without further ado, take it away, David.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to jump right into this because, as everyone knows, these are short programs, and I want to stress that this is really a shortened version of the 15 years of research that I put into this. It won't all be available tonight, but hopefully soon a book will be available if you want to fill in the blanks and learn a little bit more about it. So we'll go ahead and get started. A lot of people ask me, what do you mean by GUB? In fact, when I first mentioned it to the Historical Society, they were kind of like, what is GUB? And GUB is not really a fond name for the area. It wasn't meant to be. In fact, I think it was a little bit of stick a needle in and turn it a little bit during the days of the annexation and wars and some of those kinds of things. So it originated, at least as far as I can find, in 1938 issue of the Grand Rapids Press, when they were talking about incorporating the area, and they called it the GUB area. So it did stick for a little while, but for the most part, Galewood-Urbandale-Burlingame, or just Godfrey Public School District, is what the area is known as. I want to just list some of my main sources right off the bat, because we might not get to the end slide tonight, and I don't want to cheat them out of recognition, because they've been a big help. So those are my sources. I won't read them off for you, and I really appreciate what they've done. Let's start at the beginning, and we're basically going to go right to the 1831 and 1832, when the Wyoming Township was surveyed by Lucius Lyon. And it was known then, because Wyoming wasn't yet a township. It was known as Township number 6 North, Range 12 West. The area we're going to talk about tonight is this little red square right up there. This shows the GUB area with some future road and neighborhood annotations to kind of help orient you, particularly if you're not familiar with the area. Note that what we now call Plaster Creek was called Gypsum Creek in the survey. One thing to point out as we go along over the many years, Plaster Creek itself the course of it has been changed, it's been straightened, and dammed up and everything else. And so it's created some issues where today we experience a lot of flooding as a result. On December 2nd, 1833, DeGarmo Jones here of Detroit was awarded a land patent for this east 80-acre plot here, bordered by what would be Clyde Park on that side, and the Lee Athletic Field on the west side, and on the north around Chicago Drive, and on the south around Britten. By 1939, all of what will become the GUB had been divided up into these land patents of 40 or 80 acres, with the east half of Section 3 reserved for state salt springs, which never really materialized, and so those eventually were sold off as well. Only one of the original landowners here, Jonathan F. Chubb, was actually a resident on his property at that time. All the rest were considered speculators for both land value as well as the resources they contained. On January 7th of 1838, state geologist Douglas Houghton reported to the Michigan legislature that a bed of gypsum occurs, apparently of considerable extent, near Grand Rapids. He did the same thing again in 1840. The following year, Warren Granger and Daniel Ball erected a mill for working the gypsum deposits along Plaster Creek, where it crosses the Granville Road, or Chicago Drive as we know it today. And I guess I want to say right off the bat, most of the time tonight, I'm only going to mention Granville Road. And the portion I'm talking about is the portion in Wyoming from Clyde Park all the way out to the city of Granville itself. It was all known as Granville Road back in those days up until the early 1930s. The mill consisted of a water wheel power driving one run of grinding stone. The company leased the 80 acres from DeGarmo Jones, paying him in plaster that was delivered to Detroit via the Grand River and the lakes. Sleighs were often used, traveling sometimes up to 100 miles. The original use for the plaster wasn't in construction, it was in fertilizing fields. These are ownership of some of the early plaster companies in that area. As you can see, we already talked about Granger and Ball, but they only operated for a couple of years. And then Henry Williams, first mayor of Grand Rapids, took over, purchased the lease from Jones and took over. And he added an addition to the works, putting in another run of stone, which greatly expanded the market for the plaster. In October 1850, E.B. Morgan and Company had purchased the plaster mill from Williams and was accepting wheat, corn, and oats in trade for plaster and stucco from the mill. And by the start of 1852, shipments of land plaster by teams southward amounted to 60 tons or more daily. This 1855 map shows the extent of the plaster district by then. More than half of Section 2 is devoted to the industry under the Morgan Company. As you can see here, all of this quarter, half of this quarter, and all of this quarter right here. The mill is a small millstone symbol right here. It looks, this road might be a little confusing to you, but it is actually Clyde Park to a certain extent, and then it went around this way to avoid Plaster Creek. The mill is right here on the south side of that road. That summer, however, the company changed the Plaster Creek water course and moved the mill to what would be on the north side today of Chicago Drive. James Rumsey also engaged in some plaster quarrying over here on the east side of Plaster Creek along Silver Creek up in this area. In 1857, the quarry and mill exchanged hands once again. It also experienced a fire originating in a furnace used to boil stucco, but was saved by the Grand Rapids Fire Company number 1. The Godfrey brothers and A.D. Rathbone from Grand Rapids also became part of the operations when George White took over the company. The Godfrey brothers had already started their own quarry and mill along Plaster Creek up near the mouth of the Grand River. This is the quarry along the old Granville Road. Up to 15 feet of topsoil is removed to get at 12 to 15 feet of plaster. Most likely to advertise their product, they also had planted 60 acres of corn on which they spread 16 tons of plaster, about 500 pounds to the acre. And the results were so positive that it became popular. They became popular with nearby farmers. Quarrying left the land, though, often scarred and low-lying, if you're at all familiar with that area today, and it made it really susceptible to flooding. In 1876, a new quarry was opened up on the north side of the Granville Road by George White. Here you can also see the mill that was previously moved across the Granville Road. The company was under receivership, and the receiver directed that a new quarry be opened in the area of today's Marquette Park, which would be over in this area right here, near the railroad yards. Before the dissolution in 1878 of the company, the principals were sued by the township to compel them to fill in the holes that they've created by quarrying along Granville Road here, made it rough for the farmers and everyone else trying to get into Grand Rapids. A couple years later, the principal owners of the company engaged in a lawsuit to break it up into separate holdings. The same year, Melvin Church organized the Alabastine Company, and then in 1882 leased the A.D. Rathbone Quarry, the Marquette Park one, and erected a second mill up by the railroad tracks. Alabastine was a plaster additive for paints and wallpaper paste, which gave it longer lasting properties, and it became pretty popular. Their office, or their sales office, was located downtown on North Division Avenue. This is an 1894 photo of that Alabastine number 2 plaster mill up by the railroad. This one burned down, so this later photo showing the whole Wyoming yard here, the tracks that lead toward Grand Rapids, shows a different setup because they had to rebuild that particular mill. This is actually, it was built after 1920, and by then they were already drilling underground. This 1894 map then shows the multiple operators now. We have different companies, Anti-Calcimine Company, the Godfrey brothers have this area here, A.D. Rathbun have this area here, Alabastine Company up here where the mill is, and then Root and White owned what was left of over here. These were still farms and everything down here, and this area along Godfrey now, which is a new road, by the way, is starting to be built up. Here's an 1894 photo of that Granville Avenue mill, or Chicago Drive today, on the north side. It also shows the Granville Avenue Christian Reformed Church, but it's behind. If you have you have to move this out of the way to see it. The year prior, Mr. Church had left the Alabastine Company, and the Rathbone family bought it and operated the two plants. This is a 1915 view of the Alabastine #1 plant, showing the years each major building was constructed to replace the old wooden one. This is the office building hiding behind these trees right here, and all these buildings are still here today. This is the first factory building that was built behind it in 1906. And then this is a large factory building that was built in 1907. Some of you might be saying, oh, that was the Pepsi Cola company. Well, we'll get to that. This is Granville Road right here, just a dirt track road. And these are the interurban tracks that kind of curve off and head toward what today we know as Lee Street and head toward Holland. By 1907, nearly half of Section 2 now is owned by the various plaster interests, and the quarry method of mining is still ongoing, even though we're starting now to plat different areas of the GUB. You might look up here too. This was a dam that was built there. If you know where Kimball Field is or Kimball Stadium is out on Nagel Avenue, it was built right out behind it. And there's some great pictures of it, but I didn't bring any with me tonight. By 1905, the original quarry on the south side of the Granville Road is now filled with water, and the site becomes known as Happy Hollow. 1 year later, a portion of it along the Clyde Park was purchased by Charles Leonard for the new site of his Grand Rapids Refrigerator Company. We'll get to that in a moment. In 1911, the company decided to go underground to mine plaster due to constant flooding and weather problems. Ground was broken under the Alabastine #2 by the Wyoming yards for the digging of that underground mine shaft, 12 by 20 feet with a double elevator or hoist. And we know it mostly as the gypsum mines, and the fact that today it's used for storage and other things. It was in the 1940s now, and what was Michigan's first plaster mining operation was slowly coming to an end. There was still plaster mining going on in other parts of Grand Rapids and Granville, but this particular in the GUB was drying up and coming to an end. In January of 1941, the Dawson Food Products Company of Detroit purchased the larger factory, the west portion of the Alabastine #1 plant on Chicago Drive, and they set up that Pepsi Cola bottling and distribution factory. The Alabastine Company continued its water paint operations in that east building, the office building and the factory, the little factory behind it. By 1944, the Alabastine Company was adjudged to be bankrupt. The remaining property was sold, and this essentially split the complex on Chicago Drive in half, with the large building owned by Dawson Foods and the office building and smaller factory buildings to the east with other new owners. 2 years later, Burt Craig purchased the Alabastine #2 property near the Wyoming yard with the intent of manufacturing furniture. This proved unsuccessful, so when the local produce market relocated near Judd, Craig came up with the idea that the mine would be perfect for storing and distributing produce. He and his son Paul cleared out the tunnels, poured concrete floors, and created suitable underground warehouse. The Michigan National Storage Company got off the ground in 1957. In December 1948, the Alabastine Company was finished in this area and moved to Chicago to become part of the Chicago Bronze and Color Works. While 1948 was the end of the plaster era, the mess that was created from 107 years of plaster quarrying and mining was left behind for the Wyoming Township citizens to deal with, unfortunately. Lots of quarries, and in these quarries, they doubled as local dumping grounds, and there were quite a few of them, and it took quite a while to get them cleaned out. What were cleaned out, some of them were actually just filled in, and whatever was there was left. This was probably one of the last quarries over by Judd that was filled in. This is a view of plaster quarry locations. You can see here in the years as we talked about them, starting down here and moving up this way, and then quarrying quite a few years, almost 40 years up here. The underground operations up here. And of course, the Godfrey brothers had a separate operation up in this area, but in 1898, that mill burned down after both Godfrey brothers were already deceased, and the wives of those brothers sold off the property. Now, this is a view here that shows you what I mean about left behind a little bit of a mess in 1936 to 38, with help from the Works Progress Administration during the Depression. Lee Field was constructed for the Godfrey Lee School District. In order to do that, they had to dig out the area, and they did this all by hand, pretty much. Over 600 men were employed during the period to do this, and filled in these dumps, these quarries. And as you can see, I don't know what model car that body is, but it's still there under Lee Field somewhere, if anyone someday is interested in trying to find it. You can see here now they're pretty much getting it all filled in, and then they used the banks. They used the banks in order to build the bleachers and things like that. So let's move on then to roads and rails and how that contributed to the continuing growth of the GUB. I'm going to start right here with this interesting little map. Just a quick look at it. It's a 1931 archaeological map of Michigan highlighting an Indian trail from downtown, this red Indian trail. Oops, let's see if I remember how to do this. Yep, and it comes down here through the GUB area, down through the Granville today, and then kind of follows the river and heads out to Grand Haven. This is the forerunner of tracing at least the area from Grand Rapids to Granville and Jenison, Chicago Drive, or Granville Avenue Extension and Chicago Drive. The trail was likely used by John Ball in his land explorations of Kent County and Ottawa County during the 1830s, according to his autobiography. He said that, quote, "In exploring the Ottawa land, the last time we were in the woods about a week and coming out, we stopped at Chubb's on his farm, which would have been right about in this area." Remember I mentioned Jonathan Chubb was the only one that was actually living on the farm. They stopped there at his log cabin between Granville and Grand Rapids, on whose place near the Grand River are seen some Indian mounds, as well as defined as I have ever seen. And we're all familiar with those Indian mounds that are over there today. Looking back once again at the 1855 plat map, we notice that Clyde Park and Granville roads are really the only two roads that come into the GUB area. Clyde Park meanders a bit, as I mentioned, because of the creek. And then over here you have Porter, Beverly, and a small section of Burlingame over here on this side of the community. By 1876, more roads appear, like we mentioned before, this still curves to avoid the creek. Yeah, but you now have Granville Road, Chicago Drive extending out and heading to Granville. And that road was a toll road with toll booths outside of the city, because the city had part of their charter, they couldn't charge tolls within the city. But outside the city, it was privately owned, and there were toll booths along the way. There were toll booths at the city limits, as well as at the intersection of Granville Road and Clyde Park. And later, when Clyde Park was straightened and the Godfrey Road was added, a toll booth was placed at that intersection. And we'll talk a little more about that later on. The Township Board received a lot of complaints about the condition of the road, and finally went to the state in 1895 to have the charter removed, but it took another 11 years, and then finally dissolution of the Plank Road Company to have control of the road transferred to the township. And on that day, tolls ceased at that time. Later, the road would come under jurisdiction of the county, and then the state as a major east-west trunk line to the route to Chicago. Another problem was the ease of access from the GUB into the Godfrey Avenue factory district that was taking off at this time. Godfrey Avenue extended in Grand Rapids only so far as Fifth Avenue or Franklin Street. The Township Board decided then to direct the opening of Godfrey Avenue from the township limits at Hall Street to the Granville Road itself, or Chicago Drive as we know it today. This 1895 Sanborn fire map shows a portion of that Godfrey Road from Hall Street heading now toward Granville Avenue. Granville Avenue on both sides of Clyde Park was the primary gateway from the west. And there was just one big major problem, and that was the bridge, or should I say bridges, plural, over Plaster Creek. In February 1908, the press showed this grainy photo below to the right of the dual bridges on the Granville Road crossing the Plaster Creek. It called for immediately rebuilding the bridges, since the interurban and streetcar bridge is often mistaken for the horse and pedestrian wagon bridge. This had some dire consequences, as you might guess, when horse-drawn wagons occasionally took the wrong bridge. Finally, after years of complaints, this was going to change with the coming of the Kalamazoo interurban. This blueprint shows the proposed new reinforced bridge in red here, reinforced arch bridge superimposed on the old bridges. So you can see this was the bridge for the wagons, and this was the bridge for the interurban trains heading out that way. You can, as the wagons would come around here, the horses wouldn't necessarily go over here. They headed this way, and a few of them got seriously hurt, stuck in the open, between the open ties. So this is the bridge that they constructed and tore out the other two, and that bridge is still there today. This black is a recent photo of it that's on the side of that bridge. If you're driving across it, you almost don't even notice it. You really have to get out and walk on the sidewalk to notice it. Now, railroads also played an important part in the development of the area, and not only in the railroads being able to bring people and materials into the community and out of the community, but also for the jobs that it provided. As far by 1878, the Chicago and Michigan Lakeshore Train, which was the Chicago and West Michigan until 1881, runs a line from Holland to Grand Rapids, running across the northern boundary of the GUB. In 1900, consolidation of 3 roads into the Pere Marquette Railroad was completed. These included the Flint and Pere Marquette, the Detroit, Grand Rapids and Western, and Chicago and Western railroads. So 1905, the Pere Marquette Railroad Company decided to build new shops at the Wyoming Yard, what became known as the Wyoming Yard. And this is a 1910 picture right here showing the different shops and a portion of the roundhouse here. By 1924, a $1.4 million upgrading of the Wyoming Yard and shops were completed. The Pere Marquette's principal shops are now located at the Wyoming Yards. In 1927, there were 1,250 employees in their shops and 2,344 employees and officials on the Grand Rapids payroll. In 1929, the yard was again enlarged. So you can see this is a 1924 picture, and that roundhouse now is one of the largest in the state. And all of these different buildings or different shops to repair and rebuild engines as well as cars. But the Pere Marquette and railroads in general struggled after the heyday of the late 1800s. The C&O took over the Pere Marquette in 1947. With the coming of US 131 and the need for more downtown parking, a decision was made to build a small passenger station at the Wyoming Yard and to move the railroad's offices and engineering departments out there. This allowed for the demolition of Union Station. This is that particular small station that was built in the Wyoming Yards. Didn't need a large station because passenger train travel was significantly reduced. Railroads would continue to struggle, and not much remains of the maintenance facilities and the yard today. The roundhouse is completely gone. And at one time, it was a significant provider of jobs. It's 1897 now, and the Holland and Lake Michigan Electric Railway Company was formed, and the first interurban car ran the 6 miles from Holland to Macatawa on June 27, 1898. By October 1898, the Evening Press notes that the desire of Grand Rapids residents to have an interurban electric train in their city, but that folks from the surrounding towns are not necessarily in favor, citing the loss of local merchant business to the city. The evening, I would just keep right on moving here. On January 7th, 1901, it was reported that Henrietta Camp on Burton Street in Galewood had been disrupting the Holland interurban officials with the intent to do great harm against the men engaged in laying the tracks across her farmland right here. Henrietta had about 10 acres right here on Burton Street. She pled not guilty and was released on $300 bail, but 3 weeks later, the case against her was dropped, along with her opposition to the laying of the tracks. She had been seriously ill at her home, and the prosecutor thought best not to hold the assault charge against her. She had consented to the right-of-way deal once she understood the terms and payment, which was difficult since she only spoke the Dutch language, thereby contributing to the confusion in the first place. So she had no idea what those men out there were doing on her property, and they couldn't explain it very well. In June 1901, an informal opening of the line occurred when the first car ran over it from Grand Rapids to Jenison. The first car they used was this streetcar. It was a Grand Rapids Street Railway because the interurban cars were still on their way. They hadn't arrived yet. But they did hold a celebration out at the Jenison Brothers house in Jenison. Streetcars from Grand Rapids to Jenison and back continued running at regular intervals, while construction on the rest of the line continued. By October, the interurban was already impacting prices and activity regarding real estate along the route. The Granville Improvement Company has a tract of land platted for sale, and Judge Burlingame was counting on platting his 80 acres. Fred Nagel had also gotten the platting fever, and he soon placed a part of his 70-acre farm on the market in small lots. This is a map of the Holland route created by Tom Moss. The red circles indicate common local stops along the way here. This is the Grand Rapids Street Railway up to the city limits. The interurban picked it up and eventually used the tracks and went down through Granville and into Jenison and then down to Jamestown and across to Zeeland and into Holland. These little circles are common stops along the way, local stops. Some of those stops had little stations or shelters like the Wyoming Bark one. Some of them you just waved a flag and to get the train to stop, pick you up. In October 1907, a full-page press article with photographs sings praises for the development of the Holland interurban and its impact on the growth of the communities between Grand Rapids and Jenison. This photo shows the Holland interurban car on the left and a Grand Rapids Street Railway car on the right, meeting up in front of the Granville Avenue Christian Reformed Church. This later photo of Chicago Drive looking west with the Plaster Creek Bridge behind the photographer shows the remnants of that interurban track still there, hadn't been torn up. You can see where it curves, and it would then go straight this way and up Lee Street toward Granville. This 1930s photo shows the track now abandoned running in front of Lee High School. As far back as 1910, planning was underway for another interurban line from Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo with branches to Allegan and Battle Creek. Plaster Creek had to be straightened to minimize the number of bridges, and a new route from Grand Rapids was chosen for both interurbans to eliminate the train traffic on Granville Avenue. The track from Kalamazoo to Holland interurban line was completed by 1913. But it didn't open for passengers until 1915. This is another Tom Moss map showing the intersection of those two. I'm going to skip ahead a minute here and talk a little bit about the schools and the churches. This township records in 1855 shows that District number 7, Wyoming Township District number 7, the forerunner of Godfrey Lee Public Schools, was in existence that year and received $33.50 for its students. However, it didn't have a building, so we don't know where they attended school. It might have been in a farmhouse, it might have been in a barn, but there were no churches yet or any other structures like that. The Green School, or Plaster School as it's sometimes called in some publications, was built in 1857 on 1 square mile land leased from the E.B. Morgan and Company at the northeast corner of today's Chicago Drive and Nagle Avenue. District number 7 boundaries at the time is this red line here along Hall Street, down around and back over to Burlingame, out Burlingame to 28th Street, today's 28th Street. Took a little bit of section here to 32nd Street and back again to Alger Street and up Clyde Park to Hall Street. We know today that that's been cut off. This was given to the new Rogers District when it was created, this section up here. The overcrowding of the Green School and the end of the land lease and site, the Godfrey School, was opened in 1894 with 131 students in just 2 classrooms. And it was the 2 classrooms on this side right here, one lower and one upper on this side of the building, along with the doorway, the double doorway, which was even common in one-room schoolhouses. Additional 2 rooms were added in 1907 as the areas continued to grow. 4 more rooms were added along the back of the school, as you can see from this rough-looking photo of a young man who's about to climb that fence, because I think he knows that the outdoor toilet is right there, and he may need to use it. But this shows the unique structure they created by doing this. And so they built hallways down the center here and back to go the length of the school. This is March 1952 now, just before it's going to be raised, because a new Godfrey School was built. Now it has 12 classrooms since 1915. And it can be seen, the new Godfrey School can be seen just partially on the right over here. In March 52, they formally dedicated the new Godfrey School. It cost $300,000 to build. It was designed to hold 400 students and included 12 classrooms and an all-purpose room, library, and music rooms. The baby boom, though, caused overcrowding pretty much right away, and 4 classroom addition had to be constructed 2 years later after the school opened, and then an additional 4-room addition was added down here in 1956. In August of 1891, the Holland Christian Reformed Church was organized for families living south of Hall Street. This was the original church. They used materials from the dismantled Universalist Church on Pearl Street in Grand Rapids to quickly build this one on Granville Avenue. The church was known as the Toll Gate Church since it sat at the site of the toll gate for that Granville Road. In 1901, the church organized a Christian School Society, and they built an 8-room, first 4 rooms of a new 8-room Christian school in front of Granville Avenue Church itself. Now, we know since then that the church and schools have swapped places, the newer ones, but that's the way it was at that time. They had 6 teachers and 260 students in 1907. In 1924, they had to add junior high back behind the church. In September 1948, they broke ground for a new Southwest Christian School. John Heckman, owner of Heckman Biscuits, was president of the school board at the time. The new school was opened. The 2-story structure had 17 classrooms and other facilities that cost $270,000 to build. It was built immediately north of the old church, and the intent was the old school would be torn down and then eventually the old church replaced as well. The final services were held in the old church in 1950, and the new construction of the new church was in 1951. This curious little building was the Burton Street Mission, sometimes referred to as the Shack. It was on the south side of Burton Street where Century Avenue ends. This is where 8th Reformed Church organized and had its first meetings. And here's where it sits today. Century Avenue comes down this way, and this is the entrance to the 131 southbound expressway. The second church and parsonage were built in 1893-94 on land along Burton Street, west of Clyde Park, that had been donated by the Alabastine Company. They broke ground in 1913 for a new brick church just west of the old church. You can see the old church. You can see the rectory. The cornerstone was laid on March 1913. The Alabastine Company had donated 2 more lots to build that. Today, it looks quite a bit different, but the church there from 1913 is still sitting in the back. In October 1896, Mrs. Donna DeBoer donated a bunch of land along Godfrey Avenue and between today's Lee Street and Chicago Drive to the Diocese of Grand Rapids to build a Catholic church. And there was no place for religious instruction in the GUB area at the time. They did use the vacated Green School for a little while after Godfrey School opened, and then built this school, combination school, church, and a home for the nuns. That school became quickly crowded, so a new convent was built over this way, north of the school. And in 1932, a new temporary church was built so that the entire school could be used for, the entire building could be used for classes. But it took till 1960 before a new church was built on the corner of Godfrey and Chicago Drive, and then the old church was used for a little while for school purposes. This is a 1961 photo, not long before the school and church building would be replaced. It was in 1962 that they began construction on the new school. Had to start with the classroom section in the back first, along up to Leesma Street, then tear down the old school. I was in second grade when they were tearing down that old school. And once that was torn down, then they were able to put in the offices and the all-purpose room and separate boiler room. Godfrey Lee was severely overcrowded, or the Godfrey School was severely overcrowded at the time. So the decision was made to build a new school. And they bought 5 acres from Fred Nagel along, well, at that time, along the interurban. The article noted that there were 510 students currently going to Godfrey, the Godfrey School, but it was only built for 400. So classes were in hallways, basements, libraries, and the superintendent's office. This was the proposed new school, and the cost of the site was $5,000, and the cost of the school was approximately, they bonded $85,000 for it. Once it opened in 1923, they decided to continue to use the old Godfrey Avenue School for the lower grade students, and also some lower grade students in the Lee School to prevent those students from having to cross the interurban tracks. But in August 1922, before they opened the school, it was such severe crowding that they had to send high school students over to this commercial building on Chicago Drive or Granville Road. It later became part of the funeral home there. But they held their classes there for a year and with an option for an additional year if needed, but it wasn't really needed, just a few months before they moved in. And this is the oldest known photo we have of Lee High School. It was from the June 1925 or the 1926 Lee Echo yearbook. It's probably taken that winter with snow and everything there. This is what it looks like today after 6 major additions over the year. Well, it doesn't look like this quite today because a part of it has collapsed and they're in the process now after winning a bond of rebuilding that. But this past decade, it set a record of 1,000 students in grades 6-12 in this school. There was also a structure on Britten in Cleveland that was built in 1923 called the City Mission South End branch of the Mel Trotter City Rescue Mission. This building is still there. This part of it was the City Mission, still has the headstone in it, City Mission South End branch. In August 1926, Lee Street Christian Reformed Church was established. And since they didn't have a church, they used this facility to get started. The first Sunday services were held there, and they continued to use it until they had their new church. Their new church was this basement church on the spot where Lee Street Christian Reformed Church is today. You can see Lee High School over here. And it was strictly a basement at the northwest corner of Lee Street and Cleveland Avenue. They moved into that in September of 1926. In 1939, they decided to bond and build the superstructure over the basement. church, and this is what it sort of looks like today. It was dedicated in 1940. Across the street from Lee Street is another church. It was the Burlingame Congregational Church at one time. It was incorporated in 1924 and dedicated this small building in 1925, facing Havana and the school. It later had to expand, so it too built out just the basement, just built out its basement toward Lee Street here, and continued to operate that way from 1949 until until 1959, when they decided they needed to build out a whole new building here. Now today that building has been used by a number of other churches because the Burlingame, original Burlingame Church closed their doors in 2009. And the Church of the Open Door, which sits on Burlingame right now in Angle, had its start, first of all, on Britten Street in a small store, but then moved to the upstairs of the Juergens and Holtfluer building, as you can see here. And they met there. They had split off in 1928 from the Garfield Park Reformed Church under Reverend Albert Walkus, and moved here in June 1931. In 1951, they built this structure over there at Burlingame and Angle Street and been there since. Industry. Quickly want to go through some of this. Early nearby industry spurred a lot of growth. We're not going to talk about all these, but these are mostly along Godfrey Avenue, Clyde Park, maybe a little bit along Granville Avenue. But these all provided jobs and for people who chose to come and live in the GUB area. But the big one was in 1908 when Charles Leonard decided to build his Grand Rapids Refrigerator Company factory in Wyoming Township here along Clyde Park. They were makers of the Leonard cleanable icebox. It was becoming world renowned and one of the largest makers of that type of a refrigerator. They later became known by Leonard, the name Leonard Refrigerator, Kelvinator Leonard, Nashville Kelvinator, and American Motors Company. For most folks alive, the past 70 or more years, it's typically just remembered as Kelvinator. And this is probably a view that many of us do remember. It had had a full merger with Kelvinator in 1926, and they were producing, they went to the electric refrigerator, modern refrigerator era, and were producing 1,000 ice refrigerators per day, considered to be tops in the industry. In 1937, they merged with Nash Motors, and then in 1954 with American Motors. And during World War II, they were retooled to produce Sikorsky helicopter parts, specifically the propeller blades. 1948, or moving down, 1954, Nash Kelvinator and Hudson merged, creating the American Motors Corporation. And then in 1968, Kelvinator was purchased by White Consolidated Industries. After that, they moved the refrigerators up to Greenville, and they were specializing in ranges in this factory. But in 1986, Electrolux purchased White, closed this plant in 1987, and left by that time only 300 employees working there, but without a job. This portion was torn down following fires in both February 1996 and a second fire in March 1997. This is just a unique little building. This business did not have a lot of significance in the area, and most people don't know it was even there. But there was the Hackett Motor Car Company from 1919 to 1922 out in Beverly, just outside the GUB area. Just a simple one-story building measuring 70 by 500 feet long. This picture here shows what the inside of it. This is actually a picture from its Jackson factory, but it was similar, built similar up here in Beverly and what it would look like. They had the capacity of building 100 cars per day, but they didn't last long. They went into bankruptcy in 1922, and the building was sold in 1923 to the Wolverine Carton Company. Since that time, there's been several packaging companies in there, and there still is one there today. This right up here is still the original, my tricky finger, the original automobile factory, top of it. It was just folded right into the rest of the factory. This is the Wolverine Finishing Materials Company here, one of the later businesses that used this site right across from the Plaster mill. And right behind it is, of course, the Calvinator plant. Number of businesses operated there dating way back to 1893. This was the Southwest Ice and Fuel Company. It was actually built on a spot where a depot was built for a short period of time when the Kalamazoo and Holland interurbans met up there. This is Lee Street, the end of Lee Street, and this is today's Chicago Drive. This is all, this and the Wolverine Finishing Company now are all just vacant lots. During the war, they built this plant for extruded metals. Defense Corporation, it didn't operate very long. By the time it opened, about a year later, it closed. This is just after it closed, due to obviously the diminishing need of the war, and so Reynolds Metals purchased it and built their factory on the site, expanded it and changed some things around. And then they were there for quite a long time. And a lot of folks, I think there until 1988, a lot of folks worked there. This is about GM Diesel moving into the area. It was actually located down on Division Avenue in the old Macy factory. And decision was made to build out here in Wyoming. They had an estimated 1,000 workers on their payroll at the time, and they planned to open in 1946 with an estimated 2,000 employees in this facility. This facility has been expanded so many times that it now goes up past Porter Street, and still is in operation today, although it's had a lot of different GM uses for it. This is Chris Craft. It wasn't there very long. It's on Beverly. You can see the Reynolds Metals plant right behind it over here. And they were building for the Chris Craft boat, which was a very popular boat built up north, a Michigan-based boat company. They were building the outboard motors for a little while. Jarecki Corporation bought it out and they moved in. They were a local tool and die and stamping business, serving the automobile industry. And then Bell Fiber moved in and purchased it in 1961. A lot of businesses in the GUB. I'm going to go through as many as I can until we run out of time. This really is the last section of this presentation tonight. We have to start here. This is the first commercial business, became known as Tubbs Corner. It began as a saloon in 1893, but it was operated by Frank Morse, who was originally a motorman for the interurban, or for the Grand Rapids Street Railroad. He spent about a year pouring beer out here in the boondocks before he decided to go back to his former vocation. But it probably didn't help when I read some news articles that he was operating it without a valid license. George Washington Tubbs then purchased the property the following year, and he built a house that's in this photo here. And his family lived there. He converted the saloon and then the gas station, and then converted the saloon and then to a gas station in 1917. As time went on, he founded the Tubbs Oil Company, building several other stations around Grand Rapids before selling out to National Refinery Company. It later became a White Rose service station under several different operators, followed by a 4-star station. This gives a good look at it later on. This is a 1945 photo. This is after the saloon was taken and they added on to it, changed the structure a little bit, changed the roof a little bit, but from the windows and everything else, it was the same building. They put on a little front canopy here for the gas pumps. This is when it was White Rose. This is Kroger Supermarket behind it. And down the road here, you have the Silver Spur Tavern. Going back here, you have the Alabastine Mill, which is turning into the Dawson plant at this point. So this is Godfrey, Chicago Drive, and Godfrey. Another early business is found on this view of Granville Road looking west. The person here is standing just about where the plaster mill was. It would be back further. And looking up ahead, right here, Gottlieb Nigley opened a blacksmith shop here in the block building on the right about 1896. By 1910, his son Emil was running the shop, and he would for another 5 years before Evers and Termors took it over. And by 1918, I turned it into an auto garage. This is a view, I believe. I don't have the date. Oh, 1916. This is a 1916 view at the time. Up here at the hill, you can see this is the home of Tubbs and his family up here. These are homes along Godfrey Avenue extension over here, the northern part. And this is the home up here of the late Andrew Whalen. Mrs. Mary Whalen was living there. Well-known folks in Wyoming Township in those days. This is what it turned into eventually. They built the Granville Avenue garage here using part of that building and adding some structures onto it. Later on, it became more of a truck operation. Today, it's all wrapped in aluminum, and it's a towing service. This is the first confirmed grocery in the GUB, opened in 1898 on the southwest corner of Godfrey and Dryboard, which is Seneca today. It was run by Nicholas Palma for about a year, taken over by Alice Mole, and then Engel Schoon in 1900, who ran it for about 14 years. It continued as a grocery store up to about 1947, had a few other businesses, and then eventually it was torn down, and it actually added to the property of these landowners next door to it. In 1901, William DeWitt, he opened this meat market on Godfrey Avenue, right next to the Godfrey School. This wasn't the original building. And in 1916, the original building was moved back here toward the back of the lot, new section added to the front. He was a real town butcher. And he had his rendering and his butchering shop and everything right behind the house here. So it probably had an interesting odor to it, and everything else. Probably someplace you didn't want to spend time going out back to. They lived here in this building. William and Tina lived here in this building their entire lives. Their son, William, he graduated from Lee High School, went to college, and eventually became principal for Granville High School for many years, retiring in the 1970s. He only passed away several years ago, well into his 90s. William died first in 1964. Tina didn't die until 1982. She was running this when most of us kids were. It was mostly a candy store by that time. Pop, sodas, chips, candy, things like that. Further down on Granville Avenue Road, Simon Cott had a store for a little while, a feed store. He opened it in 1906, but he left the grocery business in 1920, and he died 5 years later. Later, the store itself, this building here, became occupied by Kimball Electric, and before it was demolished by the city for parking. He was shot in a duel with a holdup man. Both of them, actually, they both fired and they both got shot, but they never did catch the individual who held him up. Cott survived, of course, and went on. This is the Grundyke Grocery, and in the Grundyke Grocery here, building on Burton Street was again in early 1903. This is a whole bunch of family and friends and neighbor kids all sitting out. This is right here is Harry Grundyke, a long time. Christian Schmidt opened a saloon on Godfrey Avenue during Burton Street in 1902. That's Christian Schmidt, tending bar. Barrel on the left says Christian Schmidt's private stock. He had really been working as a carpenter, but he moved to this area, bought some land there, decided to open that tavern instead. This kind of shows that Godfrey and Burton, and this was the Schmidt property. They owned this too earlier, but had sold it. You can see over here a Sanborn fire map. His residence was here, his son's residence here. Ooh, the saloon was here. How we doing? Is that the warning? Schmidt's, Matt Schmidt, Chris Schmidt opened a new store at the corner. It was more of a grocery and coffee and lunchroom type of thing, and eventually moved the saloon back further. Matt Schmidt built a garage on the corner where Chris had opened that store, and Matt Schmidt's Schmidt service station. That structure of that building survived all those years until it was absorbed into the Galewood bar here, like this. It had been a number of other service stations, looked a little bit different, but the basic structure was the same all those years. Let's see here. This is a 1938 photo. It was taken on the southwest corner of Burton Street and the south extension of Godfrey Avenue over here. Simon Langer originally set up shop here, his meat market from 1913 to 1924. And Pete Zylstra opened a grocery in the east half in 1920. But eventually George Rose took over for Simon Langer and built his shoe repair shop, and then over the years expanded his shoes to Rose's shoes into both sides of the building, built a new front to it. And this is George up here in his business. Next to it was the Galewood Bakery. It originally opened in 1910, but had a couple of different owners before it became Galewood Bakery. This is a 1938 photo, but by 1948, Galewood Bakery moved down the street a little bit, and this was turned into a dry cleaner. On Godfrey Avenue at Lee Street, Henry Williamson had a store. This was also a favorite waiting place for people who were waiting for the interurban to come down Lee Street. Williamson started it in 1910 and operated it until 1927. After that, it was primarily a home, except for a couple of years. This is Henry Venema. He had a grocery store business here first, and then he decided he wanted to sell furniture, so he changed it to furniture. This is on Godfrey Street. Right down here is Lee Street. Here's the little triangular sign that says that's the interurban crossing there, Godfrey and Lee Street. This is Henry Dornboss's hardware. Up a little further on Godfrey Avenue. It was opened in 1910. He died in 1934, but his son ran it until 1965. George Visser opened a dry goods store further up Godfrey at the northwest corner of Godfrey and Seneca in 1915. He died in 1947, but his wife Olive continued operating the store until her death in late 1951. Even their daughter Florida kept it open a little bit longer until 1962. Going to move along here a minute. This is Pfeffer's Pharmacy. Most people who come into the Galewood area recognize this storefront. Didn't always look this way. Yeah, it started out as a wood building with this divider down the middle, and two different businesses were in it. There was a bakery on one side and Randall's drugstore in the other. Pfeffer's Pharmacy opened in 1929, and in 1948 he took the divider out and put a new front on it, and he expanded the store. Of course, the best thing some people remember about it is, of course, this soda bar, which was in most drugstores at that point in time. This photo taken in 1948. Across from Pfeffer's and to the west of Heisen's, there was a movie theater. A lot of neighborhood movie theaters in those days. This opened in 1927 and operated through 1956. It then became a Galewood roller arena, skating rink, up until 1965. 1970, it was remodeled to serve as an industrial painting company. Then in 1975, it was the new home of U.S. Awning and Siding until it burned in July 1988. This bank doesn't appear until 1925, but the building just to the left, that I mentioned over here, was Dykstra Dry Good. It opened in 1910. The same time the bank opened, Dykstra moved to the northwest, moved across the street, and his building was taken over by C. Thomas Stores, a regional chain. The bank was on the spot of Herbert Stites' confectionery business that also opened in 1910. A hardware and a barbershop took its place until the bank remodeled and added the brick facade. Later, the store next door would also apply that same style facade, and that's the business that's still there today. This is the store that's still there today, but not Alvine's Appliances. It's a pawn shop with the upper floor. The wooden building was the original building. This was torn down after Galewood Bakery was there for a while. There was also a restaurant in there for a little while. And then was torn down to add more parking. Always trying to find off-street parking for these areas. This is across the street in the other corner, Galewood Finance. This corner had a couple of businesses originally, but the C. Thomas store that moved into here, their employees actually accidentally started a fire that burned down the two stores that were there. And so instead a gas station, a Sinclair gas station was put in there. And then later that became Galewood Finance. Little building's still there. This little block of buildings is interesting. Greenwald's Drugs started over here, but eventually moved. This building right here was a Kroger store from 1927 to 1929. Kroger and A&P had a habit of leasing stores and hopping all over the Galewood district. You'll find about at least a half dozen times they're in different locations. It's mainly because they didn't build their own stores and buy property. They leased, and they were constantly moving to find the best places to do business. And it caused a lot of disruption, and particularly to the smaller stores over time. At the west end of that block stood Galewood Hardware, which opened in 1937, but in 1949, this was a completely new building that was constructed in its place, Chick's Hardware. And Chick's was known by quite a few people. They sponsored baseball teams and things, and people know. It then changed to Dick's Paint and Hardware, then Galewood Paint and Hardware. Today it sits mostly vacant. In fact, most of that block looks like it's vacant. There is some small businesses going on in a couple of them, but it doesn't look the same. Across the street, Simon Langer opened in 1924 with Seilinger running a meat store in the east left half and John Mole operating a grocery store in the west right half. Eventually it was taken over by Dittmar. And in the meantime, in 1927, the Great Atlantic Pacific Tea Company took over Mole's grocery business on one part of it. And so then they operated there until 1935, and Dittmar combined both of them. Eventually, there today it's a Park Pharmacy. This building is still recognizable. A few changes to it, but it was Terry's Sandwich Shop for a number of years. Now it's Shelley's Kitchen, and I do recommend it. This is where Roy Kuzy got some of his start in the grocery business across the street. And he continued. He opened this in 1927. He and Mole together. Mole left the partnership, but he continued to run it and eventually expanded it into this store, Kuzy's Foodland. It operated until the late 1970s and then became known as Galewood Foodland. Matt Schmidt had the Galewood Garage on Godfrey Avenue, right across from the Galewood Bar. And it was just a single story at the time. He ran the operation for about 10 years, but then sold the property to Al Kuzy and moved across the street. Al Kuzy added a floor to it. And this is where he got his start with his peanut butter business in this building, manufacturing company. He also had to expand his business. So he built another factory down on Burton Street, another location down on Burton Street, and eventually moved all of his operation down there. Moved into here in 1937. The Kuzy building housed a lot of things. For a while, the township offices, this is a 38 view of the township offices in it. It was actually the very first time Wyoming Township ever had a township office, even though it had been around for quite a few decades. It had moved to another location for about a year, but came back after Kuzy moved all of his factory down to the Burton location. This is a shot of the Kent County Library down at the other end. This is the Kuzy building here in their little garage, but the Dykstra building was down on this end, a Dykstra dry good building. It became the headquarters of the Kent County Library and the Wyoming branch. First starts. This shows the Kuzy building again. Nehi moved in and for a while and started to use it. This is circa 1940. They moved in a few years earlier than that. Then they moved over to Burton Street right next to the Kuzy building, which is over this way here. Also in this building, the Wyoming Police Department was set up for a little while until they built their new place up on 28th Street. And this is the intersection of Burlingame, Burton, and Lee Streets. And we're going to have to call it quits at this point in time. I couldn't get enough time to get through some of the stores on Granville Avenue. So I guess you're going to have to buy the book if you're going to want to see some of the others, or maybe I can come back sometime in the future and fill in the blanks of the things that are left. This, just to close it out, Duttmer's Service. One thing I like about this photo is it shows where Fred Eardley of Fred's Trading Post got his start. And a lot of folks remember Fred's Trading Post, but you remember it up on 28th Street. Fred got his start here with the Trading Post. It was called Hoogerheid's Trading Post, and he took it over. But just after he took it over, it caught on fire and burned down. So he decided to move up onto 28th Street, and probably was a good move. And he was really instrumental in a lot of the things that took off on 28th Street. So I want to thank all of you for coming. And if there's questions or anything like that, I'd be glad to answer some. If everybody's tired of listening to me, I can understand that too.
Yes, thank you, David. That was great. If folks could
You're breaking up.
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Still can't.
All right. Well, that's a little bit troubling. All right. So anyway,
Maybe turn your
hopefully,
video off, but leave your audio on.
yeah. If folks could please put that in the put their questions in the chat on Zoom or through YouTube, that would be
No,
great. In the comments,
I
on
still
YouTube,
don't hear you.
that would be
It's a real
terrific.
breaking up.
And so if you could do that, that would be great. So, okay. Yes, there's a question. There's a question for you, David. Can you hear me?
Maybe we got to put more quarters in the meter.
Yeah, I hear you fine, and I'm getting a lot of feedback that other people can hear me. Can you look at the chat? Yeah, it's a little odd. Anyway, yeah. Okay, so yes, for everyone, if you've got a question, please put it in the.
I'm unable to hear you at all.
Okay. Yeah, something. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, yeah, that's really strange. So anyway, yes. Yeah, there's more, maybe that's, yeah. Yeah. David? David? Headphones. Take your headphones out. Unplug the headphones. Unplug your headphones. Pull them out, because sometimes folks are having trouble with that. That's something odd. Did you turn off your headphones? Do you have any speakers? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what to say. Well, anyway, so apparently we're having technical difficulties. I'm very sorry for that tonight. So in any event, thank you so much for being here. If you have questions, I'm certain you can direct them to David. I'm not sure if he's emailing someone or not. So in any event, hopefully we'll be able to get that addressed. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let me see here. Yeah. Yes, just to let folks know, I can't seem to get through to David. Yes, yeah. Well, everyone, thank you again tonight for being here. I very much appreciate it. There's a question. Yeah, David, you can't hear me at all, can you? Yeah. Yeah, for folks, I don't have David's phone number, unfortunately. We keep. Can you hear me now, David? Yeah.
There. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Now I can, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking it was potentially that. I do have a question for you since everyone's still here. Um, uh, did the Rogers family have anything to do with Godfrey Lee?
Yes, not substantial, but um, the Chubb girl, I can't think of her first name now. She was one of the first teachers in that old green school back around in the 1860s. And she married Theodore Rogers. And Theodore Rogers actually taught school at the Godfrey School, or actually before the Godfrey School, but he taught in the two-room schoolhouse. And before he went to law, before he went to law school over in Detroit, became a lawyer. He had been the teacher and was acting as the principal. Now, the only other real connection between the Rogers and the Godfrey Lee area was when the Rogers and A.J. Longstreet and others got together to create the Rogers School District and went to the Township to get portions of Godfrey Lee, Godwin, and Newhall school districts to add to the old South Grand Rapids School District and create the Rogers School District. But
Very good. I have another question. When is your book coming out?
oh yeah, when I get it done. I keep telling. I hate to keep telling everybody next year. The issue isn't really publishing it; it's knowing when to stop researching. And to be honest, I love the research part more than I like the publishing part. When I wrote my first book, I researched it for about 14 years, and a lot of other fellow military officers nagged me to get it published. So I finally broke down and did. And I guess that's what it's going to take, is for people to keep pushing me a little bit, because publishing is not easy. Working with publishers is not an easy thing. But anyway, probably I really hope within the next few years, because a lot of what I write, a lot of older folks are interested in reading, and I want to make sure they're still around to read it.
Very good. And we had another question as to, is your book, what is your book about? Is it just the GUB, or is it broader? And do you have a proposed title?
No, I don't have a proposed title, because I'll need to find a title that actually is catchy. And usually you have a working title typically, but which is the working title is what this presentation title was. But your final title has to kind of be based on inspiration from the work itself. It will include a little bit because the GUB was impacted significantly. The development of the GUB was impacted significantly by things that went on up on Granville Avenue and what went on in South Grand Rapids, the old South Grand Rapids. Those two, that 1.5 sections of the old Wyoming Township were really tied together. And a lot of people, the early folks that lived in the GUB, would have had to go up on Granville Avenue or down Burton Street into South Grand Rapids in order to find a store or a church or something like that. Or they would have to go the other way, all the way into the village of Granville.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, there are no YouTube questions. And does anyone have any other questions, since we've managed to get our technical issues resolved there? Yes. Yeah, that might be a question for Tim. This will be on YouTube, correct? This will be on the Grand Rapids Historical Society's YouTube page. And that'll be available here in the next while as well. So that'll be available. So
Yeah,
excellent.
yeah, I believe that's correct. I believe once the live streaming stops, it will automatically be posted to their site.
Excellent. Very good. So that'll be available on YouTube as well. So cool. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank David again on behalf of the Historical Society. That was a terrific presentation. I go there quite a bit, and I was fascinated. So that was terrific, and I know the feeling on the books too. So, all right.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, and I very much appreciate it.
All right.
And I think that ends our meeting. Have a great night. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, no problem. The YouTube is behind the the Zoom, so I'm kind of letting that play out a little bit.
Okay. Sure.
But then I will end that stream and we'll be done.
All right, cool. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that was I don't know what happened with the sound. That was really weird.
Yeah, that was. I'm not